When it comes to the world of paranormal investigation, only a few names loom as large as Ed and Lorraine Warren, after being revered by some as pioneering ghost hunters and dismissed by others as controversial individuals. The Warrens went on to carve out a legacy that pretty much blurred the line between folklore, faith, and fear. Their cases have fueled books, documentary, and most famously, the Conjuring film franchise, which has further cemented their place in pop culture as icons of the supernatural world. Yet, for all the cinematic chills that we've collectively experienced, not every Warren case has made it to the big screen. In fact, some of their most bizarre and unsettling encounters remain completely untapped by Hollywood. What makes these overlooked cases fascinating isn't just the supposed hauntings themselves, but how they rippled through society. The Warrens didn't just tell ghost stories, but also shaped the way the modern world imagines haunting. Apart from pushing the world to talk more about the paranormal on an academic front, their investigations also influenced how we talk about demonic possession, cursed objects, and haunted houses. They gave everyday people a framework for understanding the unexplainable, whether you believe them or not. From late-night talk shows to news headlines, their names became shorthand for the battle between good and evil, light and shadow. People often seem to forget that behind the blockbuster scares of Bathsheba, the witch, or the Enfield poltergeist were dozens of other chilling accounts that gripped small towns, terrified families, and stirred endless debates between skeptics and believers. Some of these untold stories even seeped into local legend, forever marking the communities where they occurred. By diving into three of the Warrens' most famous real-life cases that never found their way into the Conjuring franchise, we're not just revisiting spooky history, but also uncovering how these stories continue to haunt the edges of popular culture, whispering that perhaps the world is stranger than we would like to admit. So without wasting another moment, let's get right to it. The Union Cemetery case. Union Cemetery was the old burial ground on Stepney Road in Easton, Connecticut, and is famous for being one of Ed and Lorraine Warren's best-known local cases. The site's reputation rests on the persistent local legend of a pale white lady who drifts among the headstones and sometimes appears in front of drivers at night before vanishing. The story has many origin variants, ranging from a scorned bride to a murdered woman, or even a mother who lost a child. But the element that made Union Cemetery prominent was the Warrens' repeated public attention to it in the 1980s and 1990s. Being Connecticut residents and almost celebrities in the paranormal world, Ed and Lorraine Warren were frequently invited to local hotspots. Moreover, Union Cemetery was a very short drive from their base. For many years, they investigated the site multiple times and included the case in their 1992 book, Graveyard, True Haunting, from an old New England cemetery, which collects their accounts of apparitions and alleged evidence from the cemetery. In fact, Ed Warren went as far as to publicly declare Union Cemetery among the most haunted places he'd ever seen. To back his claim, he often pulled out evidence and showed everyone the stills and videotape, where he mentions how he captured the essence of the White Lady. Not just that, Ed, in his captured photographic and video evidence, apparently gives a precise date, coining a September 1990 night of filming when he says he recorded the female figure. The Warrens and their NESPR associates also describe seeing shadow-like figures, cold spots, disembodied voices, and pairs of red eyes wandering in the woods behind the graveyard. Some of that testimony even appears in their book and in lecture. According to the Warren, their solution to this haunting was documentation plus spiritual intervention, as they publicized the evidence, performed blessings or prayers as needed, and even used the case in ministry or awareness work, rather than presenting an exorcism narrative, as they did in some other cases. To the Warrens, the cemetery remained a locus of restless spirits rather than a single demonic center that could be exorcised and closed. But local historians and skeptical investigators have pushed back on the Warrens' claim. Researchers have even noted that many versions of the White Lady's story are just oral history variants, and that some purported evidence, like the glowing eyes or moving reflector, can be explained by pranksters, vehicle lights, or misidentified features. Many people often emphasize on the lack of independently verified, reproducible evidence and the tendency for folklore to accrete detail when a site becomes famous. Even then, the Union Cemetery case only reinforced the Warrens' public brand as narrators of New England's haunted past. The case became a staple of their lectures, a chapter in their book, and a local attraction that kept their names linked to the region's paranormal geography. While Union Cemetery didn't produce the cinematic exorcism drama of other files, it definitely served the Warrens' long-term aim to build a portfolio of varied hauntings that sustained their speaking tour, book sale, and media attention for decades. The story also fed the folklore loop because the more the Warrens promoted it, the more locals and paranormal tourists retold and embellished the legend of the White Lady in the Union Cemetery. The Snedeker House Haunting. The Snedeker House case, which is also known as the Southington Haunting, is one of the Warrens' most infamous and most disputed investigations till date. In June 1986, the Snedeker family, consisting of Alan and Carmen Snedeker, their children and relatives, moved into a spacious rental at 208 Meriden Avenue, Southington, Connecticut, so their oldest son, Philip, could be closer to Hodgkin for his lymphoma treatment at the University of Connecticut Hospital. But what they initially didn't know was how the house had formerly operated as a funeral parlor. Soon, the family began to discover mortuary equipment and other macabre relics in the basement, which were details that later claimed evidence of necromantic activity within the property. At first, the family ignored, but soon, the hauntings began to escalate over the month. The Snedekers told investigators about cold spots, phantom footsteps, disembodied voices, doors and furniture moving on their own, foul stenches, inexplicable stains, including blood-like spots in mop water, and even terrifying apparitions seen by multiple family members in the accounts that circulated publicly, most prominently the Ray Garton book, In a Dark Place, which is also co-credited to the Warren, and other subsequent media pieces. Some episodes were described in lurid detail, although you should know that Garton's original draft contains very explicit allegations that he later said were embellished. Ed and Lorraine Warren were brought into the case after the family went public about the experiences and sought help. The Warrens went on to inspect the house before publicly asserting that because the place was a former funeral home used for alleged mortuary desecration, it had left the property infested with malevolent demonic forces, and so they advised bringing clergy into the process. During the summer of 1988, the Snedekers reached a breaking point, so several Catholic priests were brought in to bless the house, and not long after, a full exorcism was performed in early September. Local papers even covered the ritual, noting the church's involvement. According to both the Warrens and the family, the cleansing finally put an end to the disturbances. But shortly after, the Snedekers decided it was time to move out and leave the house behind. Even then, the Snedeker case produced a direct media ripple, as Garton's In a Dark Place, released in 1992, and further amplified the story. Not just that, it was also reenacted on the Discovery Channel, and many other TV treatments followed. In fact, in 2009, Hollywood released The Haunting in Connecticut, which was a fictionalized film inspired by the family's account and grossed widely to bring the episode to a global audience. That attention itself cemented the Snedeker episode as part of the Warrens' public portfolio of dramatic New England hauntings. But the case also became a focal point for skepticism and controversy, as many investigators and journalists pointed out the inconsistencies in witness statements, alongside the obvious signs of family stress like financial strain, alcoholism, and medical crisis. On top of that, there was never any solid, verifiable evidence to back up the claims, as Ray Garton later publicly mentioned how he had been pressured to make the story good, and that only fueled more doubts. The Snedeker haunting thus had a double effect on the Warrens' career, as it amplified their celebrity-like status and provided just the right source material for books and film. But it also intensified critical scrutiny that still continues to shape how the Warrens' legacy is read today. The Lindley Street Poltergeist case. So, in the autumn of 1974, a small bungalow at 966 Lindley Street, Bridgeport, Connecticut, became the scene of what locals called a full-blown poltergeist chaos. The Gooden family, consisting of Gerard and Laura and their adopted daughter Marcia, reported months of escalating disturbance, where they often saw furniture that moved or flew, religious objects ripped from walls, unexplained stains and odor, windows breaking, and in some accounts, even their cat speaking in a deep, otherworldly voice. The calls even drew in police and firefighters, who arrived to see and document strange occurrences. And before you know, the word spread, followed by crowds of onlookers traveling down to see the spectacle. Local papers pretty much leapt on the story and gave it national attention, thus turning a private family crisis into a media circus. As the word spread, the publicity also grew, and the little house on Lindley Street soon turned into a magnet for attention. Neighbors gathered outside, reporters rushed in, priests stopped by, and even self-proclaimed psychics showed up. Before long, Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived too. They backed the family's claims and publicly aligned themselves with the idea that the house was experiencing genuine poltergeist activity. In fact, Ed even showed off the shattered pieces of a cross he said had burst apart during the chaos, while Lorraine described having psychic impressions of restless spirits throughout the home. The involvement of the Warrens only fueled the frenzy. by giving this case an extra layer of national notoriety, especially because they were already building a name for investigating hauntings in New England. But the authorities and skeptics soon pushed back as the Bridgeport police initially investigated and at one point called the incident a hoax. Not just that, some of the city officials and a local police superintendent publicly expressed their doubts. Even the investigative journalists pointed out how the witness stories did not always line up with the statement, and some also suggested that the family's past hardships, the wave of attention, and even mass hysteria might have helped in magnifying ordinary events into something much bigger and extraordinary. But still, for researchers and a few others who dug into the case and spent years with the archival record, argued that the case is not so easy to dismiss, because after all, a striking number of reliable witnesses, including police, firefighters, and first responders, had claimed they saw things too. The tug of war between believable testimony and the possibility of trickery is what still keeps Lindley Street haunting such a hotly debated mystery. So how did it all wrap up? Well, unlike the movies, where we see these heavily cinematic exorcisms, there was no big dramatic ritual being conducted to end things. A few priests came by to bless the house, and between those rituals and the sheer weight of community attention, the strange activity slowly fizzled out. For a time, the crowds outside drifted away, the headlines stopped, and the house eventually slipped back into being just another neighborhood home, although with a lasting reputation. Whether the haunting really ended because of the blessing, because the spotlight faded, or because it was never paranormal to begin with, is something people still argue about today. But one thing surely came out of it, and that was the significant impact this had on the careers of Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Lindley Street affair pretty much pushed them into the public eye. In fact, it became a touchstone for their career as they referenced this haunting in lectures and interviews and helped cement their image as New England's go-to investigators of the uncanny and paranormal. At the same time, this haunting contributed to the pattern that would go on to follow them for the rest of their lives, with high public interest and media opportunity, paired alongside skeptical scrutiny that questioned all their methods and evidence. Even today, Lindley Street sits in a strange middle ground of believers pointing to it as proof, while skeptics calling it a cautionary tale. Either way, it played a major role in shaping how the Warrens are remembered. The real-life Ed and Lorraine are nowhere as sordid as their fictional counterparts. In fact, half of the world considered them as a couple who went around conning people in the name of faith. Most of their life had been surrounded by controversies, but the self-proclaimed paranormal investigating couple certainly made their fame around it. Having said that, now that we're at the end of this video, which one do you guys think is the most terrifying haunting resolved by Ed and Lorraine? Let us know about your thoughts and opinions in the comment box below.